Ordering at a supper club in 1963 meant walking past a bar where every stool was taken, following a hostess through cigarette smoke that hung like low fog, and sitting down at a table with a white cloth and no prices on the menu. You ordered the prime rib or the lobster, and the old-fashioned came before anyone said a word. Number 17 was a dish so loaded with butter and crab that most kitchens today would not even attempt it. Number 9 spent 4 days soaking in vinegar and spices before anyone in the kitchen turned on a burner. These were not just dinners. They were a Saturday night ritual that disappeared when the last supper club locked its doors. Here are 25 old supper club meals from the 1960s that no longer exist. Number 25. Broiled lake perch. Fresh fillets pulled from Lake Michigan or one of the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, brushed with melted butter, dusted with paprika, and broiled until the edges curled and the flesh flaked apart at the touch of a fork. Supper clubs near the Great Lakes built their Friday menus around this fish. The perch arrived from local fishermen who delivered it the same morning, packed in ice in the back of a truck. There was no freezer involved. The taste was clean and sweet, nothing like the frozen fillets that showed up in the decades that followed. When commercial fishing quotas tightened and the local catch shrank, restaurants switched to cheaper imports. The broiled perch special vanished from the chalkboard and never came back. Number 24. Steak au poivre. A thick filet or New York strip pressed hard into a bed of cracked black peppercorns until the surface was coated in a rough crust, then seared in a screaming hot pan with butter. The cook poured cognac into the pan and let it catch fire, and the flames climbed above the rim while the pepper smoke reached every table in the dining room. The sauce came together fast after the flame died. Heavy cream, a spoonful of Dijon, the pan drippings, and whatever cognac had not burned off, reduced until it coated the back of a spoon. Supper clubs served it with a baked potato and nothing else. The peppercorn crust cracked between your teeth, and the cream sauce cooled the heat just enough to keep you reaching for the next bite. The dish required a cook who was comfortable with open flame and a dining room that did not mind the smell of burning pepper. Before I move on, for those of you who want more old recipes like these gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a full collection of the kinds of meals you are hearing about right now. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. That is the only time I will mention it. If it sounds useful, it is right there waiting. Now, back to the list. Number 23. Coq au vin. A whole chicken cut into pieces, browned in bacon fat, then braised for hours in a full bottle of red wine with pearl onions, mushrooms, and thick-cut bacon. The French name made it sound refined, but this was farmhouse cooking at heart, designed to turn an old tough bird into something tender enough to eat with a spoon. Supper clubs served it in shallow bowls with the braising liquid spooned over the top, dark and glossy from the wine. The bacon and the mushrooms had soaked up the flavor of everything around them. Crusty bread came on the side for dragging through the sauce. The dish left menus when cooks stopped being willing to braise anything for 3 hours and diners stopped being willing to wait. Number 22. Stuffed pork chops, double cut, bone in, sliced through the middle to make a pocket, packed tight with a bread stuffing seasoned with sage, celery, and onion, then roasted slowly until the outside turned golden and the stuffing absorbed every drop of juice from the meat. Each chop weighed close to a pound and hung over the edge of the plate. Supper clubs in Iowa and Illinois served them with applesauce and mashed potatoes, and one chop was the entire meal. The stuffing made the difference. Without it, a pork chop was a Tuesday dinner. With it, the same cut became something worth driving 30 minutes for. They disappeared when boneless, thin-cut chops took over the meat case and nobody wanted to wait an hour for a roast. Number 21. Cornish game hen. A whole small bird stuffed with wild rice and roasted until the skin turned dark and glossy. Each guest got their own hen on a plate, which made it feel like a private feast. The stuffing was the signature. Wild rice packed tight inside the cavity and cooked in the bird's own juices. Supper clubs in Minnesota and the Dakotas served hundreds of these on a Friday night. A whole bird on your plate, golden and steaming, was a visual that no boneless, skinless chicken breast could ever match. The birds are still sold in grocery stores today, but nobody roasts them for a crowd anymore. The occasion they were built for simply stopped existing. The supper club was never about the food alone. It was about the drive. 30 minutes on a 2-lane highway with the windows down, pulling into a gravel lot next to a building that looked like someone's oversized lake house. The sign was always neon. The bar was always packed before a single table was seated. You stood with a brandy old-fashioned in your hand and talked to people you had known for 30 years, and when the hostess finally called your name, you walked into a dining room where every table had a candle and a basket of bread. The food was good. But the reason people went every single Saturday for decades was the feeling of being expected somewhere. When the supper clubs closed, that feeling went with them. Nobody replaced it. Number 20. Shrimp de jonge. Whole shrimp layered in a baking dish, buried under a crust of garlic butter, dry sherry, and seasoned breadcrumbs, then baked until the top went golden and the shrimp curled tight. This was a Chicago original. The de Jonge brothers ran a hotel in downtown Chicago around the turn of the century, and their kitchen created a dish that became one of the most ordered appetizers in the city for decades. Supper clubs across the Midwest adopted it as a main course by doubling the portion and serving it with a baked potato and a wedge of iceberg lettuce. The garlic was the tell. You could smell it when the plate left the kitchen. It was unapologetically strong, the kind of aroma that followed you home and stayed in your coat. The dish faded because the sherry and the butter made it costly to prepare well, and no shortcut ever captured the original. Number 19. Duck à l'orange. A whole roasted duck carved tableside with a bitter orange glaze that took hours to build. The sauce started with sugar cooked to a dark caramel, then hit with vinegar to stop the burn, then built up with fresh orange juice, duck stock, and strips of orange zest blanched 3 times to pull the bitterness out. The duck itself was roasted low and slow, pricked all over so the fat rendered through the skin, leaving a bird that was crisp on the outside and dark and tender underneath. Every supper club that served it had a cook who knew how to handle a duck, and that was not a common skill. A duck is not a chicken. It carries twice the fat, cooks unevenly, and burns fast if you stop watching. The glaze was not sweet. It was a balance between the caramel, the acid of the orange, and the mineral depth of the stock, and when it was done right, it turned a simple roasted bird into something that tasted like it belonged in another century. Supper clubs in the upper Midwest served it as the Saturday special, and people drove an hour to order it because nobody else in the county could get the glaze right. The waiter brought the whole bird to the table on a platter, carved it in front of you with a long, thin knife, and spooned the glaze over each portion while steam rose off the plate. The couple at the next table leaned in to watch. That was the show. The dish disappeared for a simple reason. It required a cook who was willing to stand at a stove for 4 hours, rendering fat and building a sauce from scratch for a dining room that might only sell 8 plates in a night. When labor costs went up and menus got shorter, the duck was the first thing to go. Number 18. Sole almondine. A delicate fillet of sole, lightly floured and pan-fried in clarified butter until the edges went crisp, then topped with toasted sliced almonds and a squeeze of fresh lemon. This was the fish dish for people who said they did not like fish. The sole was mild, almost sweet, and the butter and almonds gave it a richness that felt indulgent without being heavy. Supper clubs kept it on the menu as the safe option, the dish the waitress recommended when someone at the table looked overwhelmed by the rest of the menu. The almonds had to be toasted fresh. Stale almonds ruined the whole plate, and every cook who made it knew the difference between golden and burned was about 15 seconds. The dish disappeared when sole became difficult to source. Restaurants switched to tilapia and cod, and the refinement went with it. Number 17. Baked stuffed shrimp. Jumbo shrimp split down the back, filled with a crab and breadcrumb stuffing held together with melted butter and a splash of sherry, then baked until the stuffing turned golden and the shrimp curled around it like a fist. This was often the most expensive plate on the supper club menu, and people ordered it anyway because nothing else combined 2 shellfish in a single bite like that. The stuffing was the heart of it. Real crab meat, not imitation, mixed with hand-torn breadcrumbs and seasoned with Old Bay and a touch of dry mustard. Each shrimp was stuffed by hand, one at a time, and a plate of 6 could take 20 minutes of prep for a single order. The dish held its place for decades because it delivered exactly what the price promised. When both shrimp and crab climbed in cost through the 1980s, the math stopped working. Number 16. Frog legs Provençal. Small, tender legs, soaked in milk, dredged in flour, and sautéed in a pan with garlic, butter, parsley, and a squeeze of lemon. The texture sat somewhere between chicken and the most delicate white fish you ever tasted. Supper clubs in Louisiana, Wisconsin, and parts of Indiana served them as a Friday night feature, and regulars ordered them without thinking twice. The meat came off the bone easily, and the garlic butter pooled at the bottom of the plate where you dragged your bread through it. They vanished not because people stopped liking them, but because the supply dried up. Wild frog populations declined, farmed alternatives were inconsistent, and a new generation of diners never grew up eating them in the first place. Number 15. Ham steak with pineapple rings. A thick slab of bone and ham scored across the top, glazed with brown sugar and dry mustard, and broiled with canned pineapple rings and maraschino cherries arranged on the surface like a still life from a magazine cover. The glaze caramelized under the heat and pooled around the pineapple, turning sweet and faintly bitter at the same time. Supper clubs served it on an oval plate with scalloped potatoes on one side and green beans on the other. The presentation was deliberate. Every plate looked the same because the ham steak was as much about how it arrived as how it tasted. It vanished when the supper club aesthetic, generous portions on oversized plates with garnishes nobody ate, fell out of fashion entirely. There is a reason nobody opened a new supper club after the mid-1980s. The model did not make sense anymore. A supper club needed a building in the middle of nowhere, a bar that could hold 60 people for an hour before dinner, a kitchen staff that arrived at noon and did not leave until midnight, and a clientele that showed up every Saturday without a reservation because they had been coming for 20 years. Fast casual killed it. Drive-thrus killed it. The idea that dinner should take less than 30 minutes killed it. But the deepest cut was simpler than all of that. The generation that built the supper club believed getting dressed up for dinner was not optional. When they stopped going out, nobody took their seats. Number 14. Crab Imperial, a baking dish filled with lump crab meat bound loosely with mayonnaise, egg, Worcestershire, and a shake of dry mustard, broiled until the top puffed and turned golden brown. No filler, no breadcrumbs, no stretching. This was the dish that told you whether a supper club was worth the drive. If the Crab Imperial was good, everything else on the menu would be good too. If it was padded with crackers or imitation crab, you knew to keep your expectations low. The recipe originated along the Chesapeake Bay, where blue crab was plentiful and cooks treated it with a respect that bordered on reverence. You did not drown crab in sauce. You did not bury it under cheese. You bound it just enough to hold its shape and let the sweetness carry the plate. Supper clubs from Baltimore to Milwaukee put their own mark on it, some adding a dash of hot sauce, others folding in roasted red pepper, but the foundation was always the same. Good crab, barely touched, baked fast under high heat. The portion was generous. A single serving held enough crab to make a dozen crab cakes, and it arrived at the table in the same dish it was baked in, still bubbling at the edges. You ate it with a fork and a piece of bread, and every bite tasted clean and sweet. The men who ordered it every Friday did not talk about it much. It was just what they ate. But if you asked them today, decades later, they could still tell you exactly how it tasted. It disappeared because lump crab meat became a luxury. The price climbed every year, and restaurants started cutting it with fillers until the dish stopped being what it was. The real one, the one with nothing but crab and a whisper of mustard, exists now only in the memory of people who ordered it when it still meant something. Number 13. Shrimp Scampi. Large shrimp sautéed fast in a pan with garlic, white wine, lemon juice, and more butter than anyone would admit to using. The garlic went in first, just long enough to turn golden without burning. Then the shrimp hit the pan and cooked for barely 2 minutes on each side. The wine went in last, sizzling against the hot metal and pulling up everything stuck to the bottom. Supper clubs served it over angel hair pasta or with thick slices of toasted Italian bread for soaking up the sauce. The dish smelled like the Mediterranean and tasted like something a grandmother in Naples might have made if she had access to Wisconsin butter. It faded when shrimp stopped being special, and the word scampi lost its meaning to anyone under 40. Number 12. Veal marsala. Thin cutlets pounded until they were nearly translucent, dredged in flour, and seared in butter until the edges crisped. Sliced mushrooms went into the same pan, followed by a generous pour of marsala wine that reduced into a dark, sticky sauce clinging to every surface of the meat. The whole dish came together in under 10 minutes, which made it one of the fastest entrees on the supper club menu and one of the most reliable. Supper clubs in cities with large Italian populations served it alongside spaghetti or roasted potatoes, and regulars ordered it the way other people ordered coffee. The marsala gave the veal a sweetness that no other wine could replicate. The dish went away when veal fell out of favor and a younger generation refused to order it. Number 11. Chicken cordon bleu. A butterflied chicken breast stuffed with a slice of ham and a slice of Swiss cheese, rolled tight, breaded and deep-fried until the crust turned golden, and the cheese inside melted into a pool that ran out when you cut into it. The name sounded French. The execution was American through and through. The trick was rolling the chicken tight enough that the cheese stayed sealed during cooking. If the seal broke, the cheese leaked out and you had a dry breaded cutlet with a puddle of Swiss on the pan. Every supper club cook had a method. Some used toothpicks, some double-breaded. Some chilled the rolls for an hour before cooking to firm up the seal. The dish still appears on frozen food boxes in the grocery aisle, but the distance between that and the original is the distance between a photograph and the thing it captured. Number 10. Roast pheasant. A whole bird rubbed with butter and thyme, roasted until the skin turned dark and tight, served on a platter with wild rice and a ladle of pan gravy. Supper clubs in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin sourced their pheasants from local hunters during the fall and from game farms the rest of the year. The meat was leaner than chicken and had a faintly wild flavor that reminded you the bird had been running through a cornfield that morning. A whole roasted pheasant on a platter was a visual that no chicken could match. The bird left menus when game farms declined, wild populations dropped, and a generation of diners grew up never having tasted anything except commercially raised poultry. Every supper club had a cook who never called himself a chef. He came in at noon, prepped the same menu he had prepped for 15 years, and went home after the last plate left the kitchen. He did not have a culinary degree. He had repetition. He could break down a side of beef, build a stock from bones, clarify butter, and hold a béarnaise for 4 hours because he had done it 1,000 times before. The recipes were not written down because they did not need to be. They lived in his hands. When those cooks retired, the recipes retired with them. The next generation learned from textbooks and culinary schools, and what they learned was technique without memory. The food was competent, but it was not the same. Number 9. Sauerbraten. A beef roast placed into a deep crock filled with red wine vinegar, water, bay leaves, juniper berries, cloves, and whole black peppercorns, then covered and left in the refrigerator for 3 to 5 days. Every morning, someone in the kitchen turned the meat so both sides absorbed the marinade evenly. By the time it came out, the beef had turned a deep burgundy and the texture had softened in a way that no amount of braising alone could replicate. The cook browned it hard on every side in a heavy Dutch oven, added the strained marinade, and let it braise for hours until the meat pulled apart with 2 forks. The gravy was the signature. Crushed ginger snap cookies stirred into the braising liquid until they dissolved, thickening it into something dark, sweet, and sharp all at once. The ginger snap was not a gimmick. It was the detail that separated a real sauerbraten from a pot roast with vinegar poured over it. Supper clubs in Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis served it every Saturday. red cabbage braised with apples on one side, spätzle or potato dumplings on the other, the whole plate swimming in that gravy. The portion was enormous. You did not order sauerbraten and then dessert. One plate was the evening. The dish required a kind of planning that no modern kitchen wanted to commit to. 5 days of marinating for a single entree meant someone had to start the prep on Monday for a Saturday service, and if a batch did not sell, the next round was already halfway through its soak. There was no shortcut. You could not rush the vinegar. You could not skip the ginger snap. When menus shortened and kitchens got faster, anything measured in days instead of hours was the first to disappear. Sauerbraten was gone before most diners realized it had ever been there. Number 8. Broiled swordfish steak, a thick cross cut from a fish that could weigh several hundred pounds, brushed with olive oil and lemon, seasoned simply, and broiled until the outside charred lightly and the center stayed moist. Swordfish had a density that no other fish on the menu could match. You cut it with a steak knife and ate it like beef. Supper clubs along the East Coast and the Gulf served it as the prestige fish dish, priced just below lobster. The flesh held up to high heat without falling apart, which made it forgiving for a busy kitchen on a Saturday night. Swordfish became scarce when populations declined through the 1970s and 1980s, and by the time conservation efforts brought the numbers back, the supper clubs that served it were already gone. Number 7. Beef bourguignon. Chunks of beef chuck braised for hours in burgundy wine with carrots, pearl onions, mushrooms, and a bouquet of thyme and bay leaf. The sauce turned thick and dark, clinging to every piece of meat and vegetable in the pot. This was French peasant cooking adopted by American supper clubs that wanted something on the menu besides steak, and it worked because the braising did all the labor. A tough, cheap cut went into the pot in the morning, and something tender and rich came out by evening. Supper clubs served it in deep bowls with crusty bread or over buttered egg noodles. Without a decent bottle of wine, the dish tasted flat, and that bottle was the cost that eventually pushed it off the menu when margins got tight. Number 6. Country Captain chicken. Bone-in chicken pieces browned and simmered in a sauce of tomatoes, green peppers, onions, curry powder, and a handful of currants, served over a mound of steamed white rice with toasted almonds scattered across the top. The dish had roots in the port cities of the American South, where spice traders brought curry powder from India and local cooks folded it into what they already knew. Supper clubs in Georgia and the Carolinas served it as a weekly feature. The curry was mild, just enough to lift the tomato sauce into something unexpected without startling anyone at the table. It left quietly when the word curry started meaning something hotter and more complex, and a gentle spiced chicken stew stopped fitting on menus that chased bolder flavors. Number 5. Veal scallopini. Paper-thin cutlets, barely a quarter-inch thick, floured lightly, and cooked in a hot pan with olive oil and butter for less than a minute on each side. The cook squeezed a lemon over the top, added a splash of white wine, and let the pan sauce build for a few seconds before sliding everything onto the plate. No garnish beyond a sprig of parsley and a wedge of lemon. Supper clubs with Italian leanings served it with a side of spaghetti or roasted vegetables, and the speed of the dish meant it arrived at the table faster than almost anything else on the menu. The veal was tender enough to cut with the side of a fork. It disappeared the same way every veal dish did. The animal itself became the objection, and the plate went with it. Number 4. Scallops Newburg. Large sea scallops seared golden on both sides, then simmered in a sauce of butter, cream, egg yolks, and dry sherry, served in a shallow dish or a puff pastry shell. The sauce was the cousin of lobster Newburg, but the scallop version had a natural sweetness the lobster lacked. The egg yolks thickened the cream into something glossy and pale gold that barely moved on the plate, and every scallop sat in it like a stone in a still river. The dish required a cook who could hold an egg yolk sauce without scrambling it, which meant low heat and constant stirring. Supper clubs offered it as a mid-range seafood option, above the fish fry and below the lobster. When cream sauces fell out of favor in the 1980s, the entire Newburg family of dishes vanished almost overnight. Number 3. Crown roast of pork. 2 racks of pork loin tied together in a circle with the rib bones pointing upward. The center cavity filled with a savory bread stuffing or wild rice, then roasted until the meat was done and the tips of every bone were capped with little paper frills. The presentation was theatrical. It arrived at the table looking like a crown, and the waiter carved it by slicing between the bones and laying each chop on the plate with a scoop of stuffing beside it. Supper clubs reserved it for large parties, 6 or 8 people around a table, and ordering it meant settling in for a meal that would take most of the evening. The butcher had to French each bone by hand, and the kitchen had to time the roast to the minute. It left menus when tableside carving disappeared and large party dining moved to banquet halls and chain restaurants that had no interest in paper frills. Number 2. Prime rib with Yorkshire pudding. A standing rib roast, slow roasted for hours with nothing but salt, pepper, and its own fat, sliced thick at the carving station and served with a cup of hot au jus and a golden Yorkshire pudding that puffed up over the rim of the tin like a savory balloon. The prime rib was the anchor of every supper club menu. It brought people back week after week because it was reliable, generous, and tasted exactly the way it had the last 30 times they ordered it. The Yorkshire pudding was a batter of eggs, flour, and milk, poured into a tin of smoking hot beef drippings and baked until it rose and browned. It soaked up the au jus. It caught the beef juices that ran across the plate. It was the most useful piece of bread ever baked, and it vanished when supper clubs stopped roasting whole primals and started buying pre-portioned cuts from a distributor. Number 1. The Friday night fish fry. Beer-battered cod, fried until the crust crackled when you bit through it, served on an oval plate with coleslaw, rye bread, a lemon wedge, and a cup of tartar sauce. This was not the fanciest meal on the supper club menu. It was the one that mattered most. Every Friday, from late afternoon until the kitchen closed, the supper club became the center of its town. Families came. Couples came. Old men who ate alone at home every other night of the week came and sat at the bar and ordered the fish and talked to whoever was next to them. The cod was simple. The batter was simple. The coleslaw came from a recipe that had not changed in decades. Nothing about it was remarkable except that it brought an entire community into one room once a week, and the food was exactly what everyone expected. That was the last meal the supper club served on any given week, and the first one people remembered when the doors closed for good. Number 25. Foil-wrapped potatoes buried in the coals. A russet potato, poked a few times with a fork, rubbed with butter or bacon grease, and wrapped tight in a double layer of aluminum foil. You pushed it into the hot coals at the edge of the grill and left it alone for 45 minutes. When you pulled it out with tongs and peeled back the foil, the skin was charred in spots and the inside was soft and steaming white. Butter, sour cream, and salt were the standard toppings. Some people crumbled bacon on top. Kids loved these because it felt like cooking something secret inside the fire. Every father had his own theory about how long they took, and not one of them ever bothered with a timer. The cookout was never about one dish. It was about the table. A folding table with legs that never sat even, set up on the grass or the driveway, covered with a plastic cloth that blew up at the corners every time the breeze caught it. Somebody put a can on each corner to hold it down. The table told you who lived on that street. A casserole from the Baptist family, a sausage dish from the house with the Italian grandmother, a bowl of something nobody could name from the couple who had just moved in from up north. Nobody planned it. You put out what you had, and between all of it, there was always enough. That was the whole system. Number 18. Tamale pie casserole. A layer of seasoned ground beef with chili powder, cumin, and diced onion went into the bottom of the dish. Canned corn, sliced black olives, and a pour of enchilada sauce over the top. Then you spread cornbread batter across the surface and baked the whole thing at 375 until the cornbread puffed up golden and the filling bubbled underneath. The cornbread crust soaked up the spice juices from below and turned into something between bread and pudding. This was Tex-Mex before anyone called it that. Military wives who had been stationed in the Southwest brought it back to bases in the Midwest and the East Coast. And from there, it jumped into PTA cookbooks and church recipe boxes. Some versions used a bottom layer of cornbread too, making a double crust that held together like a pie when you sliced it. The woman who brought this to a covered dish supper never had to bring the recipe on a card because everyone already knew it by heart. What the Woolworths counter really was. The lunch counter at Woolworths was never meant to be a restaurant. It was a trap. You walked in to buy a spool of thread or a tube of lipstick, and the smell of grilled onions and toasted bread pulled you onto a stool before you made it to the register. Frank Woolworth figured out early that a fed customer stays longer and spends more. So the counter became the anchor of the store. But something happened that nobody planned for. The counter became the place where people went on purpose. Retirees, working mothers, teenagers skipping class, store clerks on their break. It became a public table in a country that was running out of public tables. And when it disappeared, nothing replaced it. Not the food court, not the drive-through window. The counter was the last place in American retail where strangers sat elbow to elbow and ate the same food. Number 26. Marinated flank steak sliced thin against the grain. Flank was cheap in the 1960s. Butchers treated it as a tough cut, which meant nobody paid much for it. And that is exactly why families feeding 6 kids on one paycheck kept coming back for it. The marinade was soy sauce, garlic, a little Worcestershire, and oil. Some cooks added brown sugar for a glaze. You let it sit in the refrigerator overnight, then grilled it fast over high heat, 3 or 4 minutes aside and no more. The whole secret was in the slicing. Cut with the grain, and it chewed like shoe leather. Cut against it, and it fell apart on the plate. The slices fanned across a wooden cutting board set in the middle of the table, and they were gone before the second round of anything else. Number 15. Turkey Divan. Broccoli spears laid flat across the bottom of a buttered dish, sliced leftover turkey fanned over the top, and a sauce made from cream of chicken soup, mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon juice, and a sprinkle of curry powder poured over everything. You topped it with sharp cheddar and a scattering of breadcrumbs, then baked it until the cheese melted into the sauce and the breadcrumbs browned. The original came from a hotel restaurant in New York, but by the mid-1960s it belonged to every woman who had a Thanksgiving turkey carcass and 2 days of leftovers to deal with. The curry powder was barely there, just enough to give the sauce a warmth you could not name. Some women swapped the turkey for chicken and made it year-round. The broccoli held its color under the blanket of cheese and sauce, and the whole thing came out of the oven looking like something from a magazine even though it took 15 minutes to put together. The phrase "without a recipe" meant something different then. Today it sounds impressive, like a chef improvising with confidence. In the 1960s it was ordinary. Most women learned to cook by standing next to their mothers, watching the pour of flour stop when it looked right, watching the butter go in until the pan sounded right. Measurements were a pinch, a handful, enough to cover the bottom. You cooked until it smelled done. You baked until the top was the right color. Recipes existed, of course. Church cookbooks, newspaper clippings, the cards that came inside boxes of gelatin. But the everyday meals, the ones that showed up 300 nights a year, those lived in muscle memory. A woman could make a casserole with her eyes closed if she had to. She had made it that many times. Number 22. Cottage cheese and peach plate. A scoop of cottage cheese in the center of a plate, surrounded by canned peach halves, sometimes with a maraschino cherry dropped in the middle. This was the diet plate. Every woman watching her figure in the 1950s and 1960s ordered this, and every Woolworths had it on the menu. No cooking involved. The peaches came out of a commercial-sized can, the cottage cheese out of a 5-pound tub, and the whole thing was plated in under a minute. It looked like health food before health food existed. The combination of sweet canned fruit and cold, lumpy cottage cheese was considered a sensible choice at the time, and ordering it at the counter meant you were being practical. That entire idea vanished with the counter itself. Number 24. Chicken kebabs with canned pineapple chunks. Boneless chicken cut into cubes, soaked in a mixture of soy sauce, pineapple juice straight from the can, and garlic powder, then threaded onto metal skewers with pineapple chunks and squares of green pepper in between. The sugar in the juice caramelized on the grill and gave the chicken a sticky glaze you could not get any other way. Wooden skewers caught fire on the grill. Everybody learned that exactly once before switching to metal. The Hawaiian craze hit American home cooking hard in the late 1950s, and by the mid-1960s, these showed up at cookouts from California to Connecticut. They looked harder to make than they were, which gave whoever brought them a little extra credit at the table. Number 21. Green bean bake. Not the version on the back of the French fried onion can. The homemade one, the one your mother made before the printed recipe ever existed. She used canned green beans, drained and rinsed, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a splash of milk, and whatever she had on hand for the top. Sometimes it was crushed saltines. Sometimes it was breadcrumbs toasted in butter. The French fried onions came later, when Durkee started printing the recipe on the packaging. But the casserole itself predates the marketing. Women were stretching a can of green beans into a side dish long before anyone told them how. Thanksgiving claimed it eventually, but in the 1960s this showed up on regular weeknight tables alongside meatloaf or pork chops. A casserole was not just a meal, it was a system. One dish, one oven, 1 hour, and dinner was handled. The women who made them were not following trends. They were solving a problem that repeated itself every single evening. Mouths to feed, a budget that did not stretch, and a clock that never stopped. The casserole dish itself became the most important piece of equipment in the kitchen. A 9 by 13-inch Pyrex, sometimes handed down from a mother, sometimes a wedding gift still in its original box. That dish carried lasagnas and desserts and funeral potatoes and whatever else needed to go from oven to table without ceremony. It went to church suppers and came home empty. It sat in the refrigerator with foil crimped tight over the edges. Every woman had one. Most had 3. Number 23. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Dried beef torn into strips, stirred into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and whole milk, then spooned over a piece of toast. Soldiers had a name for it that nobody repeated in polite company. Woolworths just called it lunch. The sauce was heavy, salty, and filling, and it cost almost nothing to make, which is exactly why it showed up on dime store menus across the country. A plate of creamed chipped beef at Woolworths came with a cup of coffee if the waitress liked you. The beef itself was paper thin, almost translucent, shaved from a pressed block that sat in the kitchen cooler. When Woolworth's faded creamed chipped beef on toast went with it. You can still buy the dried beef in a jar, but the lunch counter version, served hot and fast on a thick slice of white toast, is gone. Number 19. Brunswick stew cooked in a cast iron pot over an open fire. This was the dish that separated a real cookout from just grilling a few burgers in the yard. You needed a big pot, a stand to hold it over the coals, and a long wooden paddle for stirring. The base was tomato, canned or fresh depending on the season and what the garden had. Then came the meat, usually pulled pork or chicken left over from an earlier cook, shredded into the pot by hand. After that, lima beans, corn kernels cut from the cob, diced potatoes, and okra if you were far enough south for it to grow in the yard. Some cooks added a splash of vinegar at the end. Others dropped in hot sauce and called it finished. The recipe changed depending on whether you were in Virginia, Georgia, or North Carolina, and all 3 states would tell you with a straight face that they invented it. Virginia pointed to an 1828 hunting camp along the Nottoway River and a cook named Jimmy Matthews who put squirrel in the pot and let it go all day. Georgia had an entire town named Brunswick and a commemorative iron pot sitting in the public square to prove the claim. North Carolina stayed quiet and just kept making theirs. Nobody has ever settled that argument, and nobody is going to. What mattered was the size of the pot. A real Brunswick stew was never made for 4 people. It was made for 40. The cook started before dawn and stood by the fire all day, stirring with that paddle, adjusting the coals, adding things as the afternoon wore on. Neighbors wandered over to check on it the way you would check on somebody recovering from surgery. They looked into the pot, nodded, and said it was coming along fine. By the time the sun dropped and the coals burned to white ash, you ladled it into a bowl and ate it standing in the grass. It was brown and thick and plain-looking, and it was the best thing at the entire cookout. There is something about fire and smoke that changes the way people act around each other. Inside the house, dinner was private. You set the table, you ate, you cleaned up, and nobody outside the family saw what you had. But when the grill came out, everything went public. Your cooking was on display, your yard was on display, your chairs, your kids, your lawn, all of it visible from the sidewalk. And instead of making people nervous, it loosened them up. The grill gave men who never spoke to each other all winter a reason to stand in the same circle. It gave women who normally just waved from the driveway a reason to walk across the grass carrying something covered in foil. The food was the excuse. The company was the whole point. Number 20. King Ranch Chicken Casserole. This one came out of Texas and spread across the South like a brush fire. Torn corn tortillas layered with shredded chicken, a mixture of cream of mushroom and cream of chicken soup, canned tomatoes with green chiles, and a heavy layer of shredded cheddar. The tortillas soaked up the liquid and turned soft, almost like a savory bread pudding. Nobody agrees on where the name came from, whether it had any real connection to the King Ranch or just sounded like something grand. Either way, it became a potluck staple. You could assemble it the night before, keep it in the refrigerator, and slide it into the oven an hour before guests arrived. The chilies gave it just enough heat to keep it interesting without scaring anyone away. Number 19. Deviled Ham Sandwich. Underwood deviled ham spread straight from the red can with the devil on the label, smeared on white bread, sometimes with a thin layer of yellow mustard, sometimes with nothing else at all. This was one of the cheapest sandwiches on the Woolworths menu, and for a lot of people it was the first time they ever tasted deviled ham. The can cost pennies. The labor cost was zero. You opened the can, you spread it, you served it. No cooking, no heating, no skill required. And yet, it tasted like something. That salty, finely ground pork paste with its smoky pepper bite was oddly addictive. Kids loved it because it came from a can with a cartoon devil. Adults loved it because it was filling and it cost almost nothing. Woolworth's lunch counters moved through cases of Underwood deviled ham every week. The spread had been around since the 1860s, making it one of the oldest branded food products in the country. But the lunch counter sandwich was the version that put it in front of millions of people who never would have bought the can at a grocery store. The waitress would set it down on a small plate next to a handful of potato chips and a pickle spear, and that was lunch. No sides menu, no upsell, just a sandwich that cost a dime and tasted like it cost more. When Woolworths disappeared, the deviled ham sandwich disappeared from public life along with it. You can still buy the can today at most grocery stores. The red devil is still on the label, and the recipe inside has barely changed. But nobody is spreading it on bread behind a lunch counter and sliding it across to you on a ceramic plate for pocket change. The deviled ham sandwich was never going to end up on a restaurant menu. It was too cheap, too simple, too plain for that. It needed a place like Woolworths to exist in public, and when that place was gone, the sandwich went back into kitchens and packed lunches where no one could see it. Number 28. Cucumber and onion salad in ice water. Thin slices of cucumber and white onion, separated into rings, dropped into a bowl of white vinegar, a little sugar, salt, pepper, and enough cold water to cover everything. It sat in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours before it came outside. Some people added a splash of oil. Most left it alone. The bowl came out sweating by the time the coals were hot, and it stayed on the table all afternoon without turning. The vinegar kept it safe in the heat far longer than anything made with mayonnaise, which is why women who cooked for crowds always trusted it. You served it with a slotted spoon so the liquid stayed behind. Light and sharp and cold. The perfect side next to a plate full of heavy grilled meat. Number 24. Tater Tot Hot Dish. This one came straight out of Minnesota church suppers and spread across the upper Midwest faster than a prayer chain. You browned ground beef with diced onion in a skillet, stirred in a can of cream of mushroom soup and a cup of frozen mixed vegetables, then scraped the whole thing into a greased casserole dish. You stood frozen tater tots across the top in tight rows and slid it into the oven at 375 until the tots turned golden and the filling bubbled up through the gaps. Some women draped sliced American cheese over the top for the last few minutes so it melted down into a blanket. The beauty was the zero-skill assembly. You opened packages, arranged layers, and walked away. Kids loved it for the tater tots. The men loved it because it tasted like a hamburger with potatoes built in. The woman who made it loved it because dinner took 10 minutes of hands-on work and the dish washed itself clean. Church cookbooks across Minnesota and Wisconsin printed dozens of variations through the 1960s, each one a little different, none of them wrong. Number 25, pimento cheese sandwich. Sharp cheddar ground up with mayonnaise and a jar of diced pimentos spread thick on soft white bread and cut corner to corner. No lettuce, no tomato, nothing fancy. This was the sandwich that every Woolworths in the South had ready before the doors opened. The pimento cheese was mixed fresh each morning in most locations, kept in a steel bowl behind the counter, and spooned out by the scoop. You could get one for under a quarter in the early 1960s. It was the kind of sandwich that tasted better at a lunch counter than it ever did at home because the bread was always fresh and the cheese had that slightly tangy bite from sitting in the cooler overnight. When the counters closed, pimento cheese retreated back to church suppers and family reunions, and the lunch counter version disappeared completely. Number 22, creamy coleslaw with celery seed. A head of green cabbage shredded on a box grater, mixed with grated carrot and dressed with mayonnaise, a little sugar, white vinegar, and celery seed. The celery seed was what separated the real slaw from the watery store-bought kind you got in a plastic tub. Without it, you just had dressed cabbage. The whole bowl needed at least an hour in the refrigerator before serving, so the sugar dissolved and the shreds softened just enough to lose their raw bite. It went next to the ribs, next to the hot dogs, next to anything that came off the grill. One dish that appeared on every single plate. Nobody deliberately went back for seconds, but the bowl was always scraped clean by the time the sun dropped. Number 22, hamburger stroganoff bake. Real beef stroganoff called for tenderloin and sour cream and careful timing. This was not that. This was ground beef browned with onions, mixed with egg noodles and a can of cream of mushroom soup, with a dollop of sour cream stirred in at the end. You poured it into a baking dish, maybe scattered some French fried onions on top, and put it in the oven just long enough to heat through and let the edges crisp. The sour cream kept the noodles from drying out. The mushroom soup did most of the seasoning. It was a weeknight answer to a dish that restaurants charged real money for, and nobody at the table knew the difference or cared. You could make it in the time it took Walter Cronkite to finish the evening news. Number 24, lime jello salad. A square of bright green gelatin loaded with shredded carrots, crushed pineapple, and sometimes cottage cheese served on a leaf of iceberg lettuce with a dollop of mayonnaise on top. Woolworth's lunch counters kept these pre-made in individual glass dishes behind the counter, lined up on a refrigerated shelf where you could point at the one you wanted. It counted as a salad. It counted as a side. Some people ordered it as dessert. Nobody questioned it. The green wobble was part of the scenery at every five and dime counter in the country, and when those counters shut down, the Jell-O salad lost its last public stage. You can still find the recipe in old church cookbooks, but nobody is serving it over a lunch counter anymore. Before I go any further, for the folks who want more of these kinds of recipes all gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. That is the only time I will mention it. If it sounds like something you need, it is right there. Now, back to the list. Number 29, deviled eggs. Somebody's mother always showed up with a plate of them, arranged in a circle on one of those special divided trays that existed for no other purpose. The filling was simple. Yolks mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, and a pinch of salt. A shake of paprika on top for color. Some women added sweet pickle relish. Others stirred in a drop of Worcestershire and called it their secret. The eggs had to stay cold. If they sat in the sun too long, the mayonnaise turned dangerous, and everybody knew it, but nobody ever threw them out until the plate was picked clean. You ate two standing up before you ever sat down with a real plate. They were the appetizer nobody called an appetizer, and the tray they came on was more important than the recipe itself. Number 16. Ham and noodle casserole. Leftover ham was the starting point, and every housewife in the 1960s had leftover ham. You cubed it, tossed it with cooked egg noodles, stirred in a can of cream of celery soup thinned with a splash of milk, and folded in a handful of frozen peas. Poured it into a casserole dish, crushed a fistful of saltine crackers over the top with a pat of melted butter, and baked it at 350 until the cracker crust went crisp and the filling set. The cream of celery was the detail that separated this from every other ham casserole on the block. It had a lighter, almost herbal taste compared to the cream of mushroom that went into everything else. This was the dish that appeared on Monday night after a Sunday ham, and again on Wednesday if the ham held out. Nobody called it elegant, they called it handled. Number 21. Egg salad sandwich. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with mayonnaise, a little mustard, salt, pepper, and maybe some finely chopped celery if the cook felt generous, pressed between soft bread and cut in half. Woolworths made these by the dozens every morning, wrapped them in wax paper, and stacked them in a glass case at the counter. They were cold, they were plain, and they cost next to nothing. The egg salad sandwich was what you ordered when you had 15 cents and no opinion about lunch. Every Woolworths coast to coast had the same one, made the same way, tasting roughly the same whether you were in Portland or Tallahassee. That kind of national consistency from a lunch counter without a franchise playbook is something that does not exist anymore. Number 20. The relish tray. A divided glass dish, sometimes crystal if the hostess wanted to set a tone before the grill was even lit. Celery sticks in one section, green olives stuffed with pimento in another, sweet gherkin pickles in the third, sometimes black olives, sometimes carrot sticks, sometimes radishes carved into little roses that took more patience than anyone wanted to admit. The tray came out before anything else and stayed on the table all day. Children picked every olive clean and left the celery completely untouched. Adults ate the celery later when they were pretending not to go back for another plate of meat. The dish itself was the kind of thing a woman received as a wedding present in 1952 and used at every gathering for the next 30 years. Number 19. Pork chop and rice bake. You laid 4 bone-in pork chops flat in a greased baking dish and scattered a cup of uncooked long-grain rice around them, sliced an onion into thick rings, and draped them right over the chops. Then you poured a can of beef consomme mixed with a can of water over everything, sealed it tight with foil, and let it bake at 350 for an hour and a half. The rice drank up the consomme and the pork drippings together, going soft and deeply savory without a single stir. The chops came out so tender they fell apart into the bed of rice below. Consomme was the quiet trick here. It gave the rice a richness that plain water or chicken broth never could. Some women tossed a sliced green pepper on top for color or shook garlic powder into the liquid before sealing the foil, but the plain version needed nothing added. 5 minutes of actual work before the oven handled the rest, and the kitchen smelled like Sunday dinner on a Tuesday. Number 17. Salisbury steak plate. A ground beef patty shaped into an oval, pan-fried and covered in thick mushroom gravy, served with mashed potatoes and usually a side of canned green beans. Woolworth's Salisbury steak was not a hamburger. The patty had breadcrumbs and egg mixed into the meat, which made it softer and stretched it further. 1 pound of ground beef could produce 3 or 4 patties this way, and the gravy covered up the fact that the meat was more filler than steak. The name came from a doctor in the 1880s who promoted ground beef patties as a health food. By the time Woolworths put it on the menu, nobody remembered the doctor. They just knew it was cheap, hot, and filling, and it came with enough gravy to make everything on the plate taste the same. Number 23. Baked beans with brown sugar and bacon. Canned pork and beans, usually Van Camp's, poured into a deep baking dish. Then brown sugar, yellow mustard, ketchup, and a splash of Worcestershire stirred in until the color deepened. Strips of raw bacon laid flat across the top. The dish baked at 350 degrees for a full hour, and it came to the cookout in the same pan with a serving spoon stuck right in it. The bacon rendered down into the sauce, The brown sugar turned to caramel at the edges, and the beans thickened into something you could pile on a plate without them running all over the place. Every neighborhood had one person who made these better than everybody else, and that person was expected to bring them to every gathering without exception. Number 14. Chicken tetrazzini, named after the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, who performed in San Francisco in the early 1900s. The original dish was invented either at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco or at the old Knickerbocker Hotel in New York, depending on who tells the story. Either way, it started as an elegant dish of spaghetti with chicken in a cream sauce, baked with Parmesan cheese on top. By the 1960s, it had been thoroughly domesticated. Housewives used canned cream of mushroom soup instead of a roux. Leftover chicken or turkey replaced the carefully poached breast. The spaghetti was whatever was in the cupboard. Canned mushrooms went in because fresh ones were expensive and hard to find in most grocery stores outside of cities. You mixed it all together, poured it into a casserole dish, grated some cheese on top, and baked it until the edges turned golden. The day after Thanksgiving, tetrazzini was the answer to the question of what to do with all that leftover turkey. You could stretch one carcass into 2 full casseroles and freeze one for later. Women traded their versions of it the way they traded gossip. A little sherry in the sauce was the mark of someone who considered herself a slightly more adventurous cook. Pimento added color. Slivered almonds on top meant company was coming. But the bones of the dish stayed the same: pasta, chicken, creamy sauce, oven. An opera singer's name on a weeknight supper that cost almost nothing to make. The original Luisa would not have recognized it, but she probably would have eaten a second helping. That is the highest compliment a casserole can earn. Named for a diva, perfected by women who never heard her sing. Number 20. Welsh rarebit. Cheddar cheese melted down with a splash of Worcestershire sauce, sometimes a little beer, poured hot over a thick piece of toast. Woolworths served it as a lunch special, usually with a pickle on the side. The name sounded fancy. The dish was anything but. It was melted cheese on bread with a kick, and it cost about as much as a grilled cheese but felt like twice the meal. Welsh rarebit had been around for centuries, but the Woolworths version stripped it down to its simplest form. No ramekin, no broiler crust, just a ladle of cheese sauce over toast on a heavy ceramic plate. When the counters closed, Welsh rarebit lost its last foothold in everyday American eating. Today it exists almost exclusively in British pubs and old cookbooks, and most people under 50 have never heard of it. Number 30. Lipton onion dip with ridged potato chips. 1 packet of Lipton onion soup mix stirred into a pint of sour cream. That was the whole recipe. You could find it printed right on the side of the box, and by 1958 half, the country had memorized it. The ridged chips were important. Flat chips broke. You needed something sturdy enough to hold a thick scoop without folding over in your hand. This showed up at every cookout from Memorial Day through September, and it was always the first thing gone. The bowl sat on the folding table next to the paper plates, and kids went through it before the meat was off the grill. It cost about 30 cents to make. Nobody ever tried to improve it because nothing needed improving. Number 17. Macaroni and tomato bake. Elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, butter, sugar, salt, and sometimes a handful of shredded cheese on top. You boiled the macaroni, drained it, mixed it with the tomatoes, added a spoonful of sugar to cut the acid, and baked it in a buttered dish until the edges went crusty and the top turned a shade of red that no restaurant could replicate. This was Depression food that survived into the 1960s because it cost almost nothing and tasted better than it had any right to. The sugar was the secret. It smoothed the sharp edge of the canned tomatoes and turned the whole dish into something that tasted almost sweet, almost savory, and entirely its own thing. Church cookbooks across the Ohio Valley printed some version of it, and every family swore theirs was the right one. Number 18. Hot open-faced turkey sandwich. A slice of white bread laid flat on a plate, covered with sliced turkey, then smothered in brown gravy. Mashed potatoes on the side, sometimes with a scoop of cranberry sauce. This was the Thanksgiving plate you could get any Tuesday in January, and Woolworths served it as a daily special in most locations. The turkey was roasted in-house in some stores and came from a commercial supplier in others, but the gravy was always made from drippings and flour, thick enough to hold its shape on the bread. You ate it with a knife and fork. Nobody picked this up. The gravy made sure of that. It was a full hot dinner for the price of a sandwich, and people who ate alone at the counter ordered it more than almost anything else. That open-faced turkey plate was comfort on a 10-inch ceramic dish. Number 21. Yellow mustard potato salad. Not the fancy kind with fresh herbs and red potatoes cut into perfect cubes. The yellow kind. Boiled potatoes broken into rough chunks, mixed with mayonnaise, bright yellow mustard, chopped hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced celery, and enough salt and pepper to taste from across the table. Some families added raw onion. Others considered onion in potato salad a serious offense. The mustard turned the whole bowl a pale golden color that told you exactly what you were eating before you ever picked up a spoon. Every family on the block believed theirs was the definitive version. The only real argument was whether you served it cold or let it come to room temperature. Both sides had strong feelings, and neither was going to move. Number 23. Asparagus casserole. Canned asparagus spears, drained and laid flat in a baking dish, covered with a mixture of cream of mushroom soup and milk, then topped with shredded cheddar and crushed Ritz crackers. It baked until the cheese melted down through the crackers and the asparagus was hot all the way through. Fresh asparagus was seasonal and expensive, but the canned kind sat on the shelf year-round and cost almost nothing. Some women added sliced hard-boiled eggs between the layers for substance. This was the side dish that appeared at Easter dinners and ladies' luncheons, sitting next to the ham like it had always belonged there. Nobody would call canned asparagus elegant today, but covered in cheese and crackers and pulled from a hot oven, it earned its place on the table. Number 27. Italian sausage with grilled peppers and onions. The links came from the butcher counter or the Italian grocery if your neighborhood had one. Sweet or hot, depending on the family and who was doing the shopping. They went straight on the grate, no foil, and you turned them slowly until the casing split and the fat hit the coals with a hiss that made everybody look over. Sliced bell peppers and thick onion wedges cooked right alongside them on the hottest part of the grate. Everything came off at the same time, piled onto a hoagie roll or eaten straight off the plate with a fork. The Italian and the Polish families brought this to every block party, and within a couple years the rest of the street started making it too. The smell alone was enough to pull people across the yard. Number 12. 7-layer casserole. The appeal was in the name. 7 layers. You did not mix anything. You stacked it. A layer of uncooked rice on the bottom, then a layer of canned corn, then ground beef crumbled raw over the top, then sliced onions, then sliced green pepper, then a can of tomatoes poured over everything, and finally a layer of bacon strips laid across the top. You covered it tight with foil and baked it for at least 90 minutes. The rice cooked in the liquid from the tomatoes and the meat. The bacon rendered on top and seasoned everything below it. When you pulled off the foil, the layers were still visible, stacked like a geological cross-section of a weeknight supper. Nobody stirred it. That would have ruined the whole point. The neon went dark, the parking lots emptied, and those 25 meals went with them. If you ever sat in one of those dining rooms even once, you know what disappeared. It was never just the food. Cook one of them before the week is out. Braise the coq au vin on a Sunday afternoon. Fry the cod on a Friday. Brown the pork chops if you want your kitchen to smell the way it used to. And if you remember a supper club meal that should have been on this list, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.